I was facing the cereal aisle when I realized the man at the end of it had been standing there for 40 minutes. My name is Derek. I was 26 at the time. I worked overnight stock at a 24-hour grocery store called Brentwood Foods off Route 30 in western Pennsylvania. Family-owned since the 80s, not a chain. The kind of place where the floor wax smelled the same every single night, that artificial lemon pine smell, slightly too sweet, and the music cut out at exactly 2 a.m. for reasons nobody ever fixed. I'd been there 2 years, long enough to know the rhythm. The night manager, Phil, left at 11 on the dot most nights. He'd do a walkthrough, sign the log, grab his jacket, and say the same thing every time. "You're good, Derek. Try to finish frozen before 4. Then the door would swing shut, and it was just me, the hum of the coolers, and whoever happened to drift in off Route 30. The overnight regulars were predictable. An older woman who came in every Tuesday for cat food and ginger ale, a truck driver who always grabbed 2 sandwiches from the deli case and a Gatorade, a college kid from the sheets down the road who came in on his break for energy drinks. I knew their faces. I knew what they'd buy. That predictability was the whole comfort of the job. It was a Wednesday in January. An ice storm was moving through, the kind that doesn't snow so much as coat everything in a thin shell of freezing rain, making the parking lot look like it had been lacquered. The roads had been mostly empty since 10. The lot outside held 2 cars, my Civic and one I didn't recognize, a gray Dodge Caravan, older model, no front plate. Pennsylvania requires a front plate. I noticed the absence the way you notice a missing tooth. I was pulling stock from the back and working my way up the cereal aisle when I noticed him. He was standing at the far end of aisle 7, just standing, not looking at anything, no basket, both hands at his sides. He was wearing a dark coat, heavy canvas or wool, something with weight to it. He was facing my direction, but his head was slightly down, like he was reading something on the floor. I figured he was waiting for someone, lost in his head. It happens. I went back to the stockroom, loaded the cart, came back out. Maybe 15 minutes had passed. He was still there. Same spot, same posture. I watched him for a moment. He didn't move, not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head. Most people standing in one place will fidget, check a phone, adjust a sleeve, rock heel to toe. He did none of that. I pushed my cart past the end of the aisle and kept working. 20 minutes after that, I came around the corner of aisle 6 and glanced down 7. Still there. My stomach dropped a little, not a lot, just enough. I walked toward him slowly, the way you do when you're trying to seem casual. The fluorescent lights above aisle 7 had always had a faint flicker, a barely perceptible strobe you stopped noticing after your first week. That night I noticed it. I asked if he needed help finding something. He looked up, his eyes were fine, normal. He said no, he was just thinking. That should have been the end of it. But his voice was flat, not nervous, not tired. It sounded like someone reading from a card, no rise or fall, just words produced in the correct sequence. I went back to stalking. I told myself it was nothing. At 12:15, I went to the break room to grab my water bottle. The back hallway ran along the rear of the store, past the stockroom, past the office, past the emergency exit. That exit had a push-bar door with an alarm that was supposed to go off if it opened. The alarm had been broken for months. Phil kept saying he'd get it fixed. The door was propped open with a brick. I stood there looking at it. Cold air was coming in off the loading dock in a steady, low current, not gusting, just pressing patient and even against my face and hands. The sleet was ticking against the asphalt on the dock in a dry, almost rhythmic sound, like someone tapping a fingernail on a table. There was nobody out there, just the dark and that sound, and a yellow loading light casting a small wet circle on the concrete before the dark swallowed it whole. I hadn't propped that door open. Phil never propped it open. The delivery window wasn't until 6 a.m. I stood there long enough that the cold worked through my vest and into my shoulders. Then I pulled the brick out and let the door close. I stood very still, nothing from outside, just the sleet. Then when I turned back toward the hallway, the low ambient hum of the cooler banks, a sound I heard so constantly I usually didn't hear it at all. I went to the office and tried to call Phil. His cell rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again, same thing. It was 1:15 midnight. Phil was usually still up. I left a message and went back to work. But I walked differently after that, slower, more aware of the corners. I started noting which aisles I could see the full length of from wherever I was standing. By 1 a.m., the man in the dark coat had moved. He was at the front of the store now, near the magazine rack, doing the same thing, standing, looking slightly down. No basket, no cart. From the back of aisle 4, I could just make out the shape of him in my peripheral vision, dark and still against the brighter display lighting near the front windows. I walked to the front register. We had an overnight cashier named Maria, but she'd called out sick. It was just me. I stood behind the empty register and said, loud enough for him to hear, that we closed in 15 minutes. We didn't close, we were 24 hours. I don't know why I said it. I just wanted to see what he'd do. He looked up at me, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes. The muscles around the mouth doing what they're supposed to do, nothing behind it. He said, I know you don't close, Derek. I hadn't told him my name. I wasn't wearing a name tag. Phil had told us months ago that we didn't have to wear them on overnight. Basically nobody in the store, no reason for them. I kept my face still. I said, I don't think I caught your name. He didn't answer, he just looked back down at the floor. The store was very quiet right then. The music was between songs, the coolers hummed. Outside, the sleet kept hitting the front windows in small, scattered pulses. I walked toward the office like I had something to do there. I didn't run, I didn't let on. I went in, locked the door, picked up the landline, and called 911. Dispatch answered in 2 rings. I gave the address, Brentwood Foods, 4400 block of Route 30 westbound, and I said there was a man in the store who I believed was acting as a distraction while someone else was in or around the building. I said it that calmly. I don't know where those words came from, but they fit. Because that was when I understood what was actually happening. The prop door, the man standing still in plain sight, keeping me looking at him, keeping me moving through the aisles, keeping me away from the back of the store. He knew my name. That meant he'd been in before, maybe multiple times, watching, learning the routine. He knew Phil left at 11. He knew I worked alone. He'd had enough nights in that building to memorize my name without ever introducing himself. He wasn't there to rob the register. He was there to hold my attention at the front of the store while something happened in the back. I stayed in the office, kept the door locked, told the dispatcher I was in the back office and I wasn't coming out. She stayed on the line with me. Her voice was level and unhurried, which helped. I watched the store through the internal camera monitor on the desk, a small gray screen divided into 4 quadrants, the image greenish and grainy. Music, the cooler hum, the front door still closed. Nothing moved in any of the 4 squares. At some point, the man in the dark coat walked out the front door. I watched him go on the monitor, slow, unhurried. He crossed the parking lot to the gray Caravan and drove away without speeding. No sudden acceleration, just a car pulling out of a lot, turning west on Route 30, tail lights disappearing into the dark in the sleet. 2 officers arrived about 6 minutes later. They cleared the store and the loading dock. They found the back door the way I'd left it, closed but unlocked. And they found something behind the pallets in the stockroom, near the pharmacy storage cage. A black duffel bag, empty, not mine. One of the officers said it looked like it was staged to be filled. They took a report. They said I'd done the right thing. They said if I hadn't called when I did, the night could have gone differently. I asked them what they meant by that. The older one just looked at me and said, "You were alone in there." Phil answered my calls around 2:30. He drove in, looked at the bag, looked at the report, and stood in the stockroom with his hands on his hips, not saying anything for a long time. The fluorescent lights in there were brighter than the floor lights. He looked pale under them, tired in a way that went past that one night. Then he said, "I'll get the door alarm fixed." That was it. That was all he said. I drove home on Route 30 as the sleet turned to actual snow. The gray Caravan was never identified. No one matching the man's description was ever arrested. The police drove by a few extra times in the following weeks. The duffel bag went into evidence. I went back to work 4 days later. The alarm still wasn't fixed. I quit 2 weeks after that, not dramatically. I found a day shift job at a hardware warehouse off Interstate 79 and put in my notice. Phil said he was sorry to see me go. I didn't have much to say to that. I still think about the way the man smiled, the way he said my name like it was a fact he'd memorized, the way he stood in that aisle for 40 minutes, patient, doing nothing, just keeping me looking the wrong direction. I think about how long it might have taken me to call if I hadn't found that door. I think about what they would have put in that bag. The store closed the following October, something about the lease. I don't drive down that stretch of Route 30 anymore if I can help it. I was 31 years old, eating lunch at my desk, when I finally understood what I had seen in that backyard. The article was from a small paper in Nacogdoches County, East Texas. I had grown up 2 towns over. The name in the headline stopped me cold. Cody Marsh, 34 of Garrison. I didn't read past the first paragraph right away. I just sat there with my sandwich in my hand, going back to 1994. We were 11 that summer. Cody moved onto Pinder Road in May, into the beige house at the end of the cul-de-sac. His family had an older GMC pickup, dark green, one-door primer gray where a panel had been replaced. My mom sent me over with a plate of brownies because that was what you did. Cody answered the door, took the plate, said his mom was resting. Then he asked if I wanted to see his room. That first hour was completely normal. He had baseball cards, he had a Sega, he let me pick what to play without making it a thing. I thought he was cool. The kind of quiet that seemed confident rather than strange. I need you to understand that part, because it made everything after it harder to read right. The first thing I noticed was the basement door. It was in the kitchen just past the refrigerator. Most houses on our street didn't have basements. The clay soil in East Texas doesn't allow for it, but Cody's family had one. The door had a slide bolt on the outside, not a lock you needed a key for, just a heavy steel bolt, the kind you'd put on a barn stall, dark iron, mounted with screws sunk deep, not an afterthought, something chosen carefully and installed with purpose. I noticed it the way you notice a wrong word in a sentence. It snagged at me, I filed it away and moved on. Over that summer we became close. Same bus, same lunch table, same worn-down patch of grass behind the school. His mom, Darlene, was thin and quiet. She smiled with her mouth, but not much else. His dad, Ray, worked long hours somewhere and wasn't home most evenings. When he was home, the house felt different, smaller. The air in the room seemed to change, not colder exactly, just closer, like the walls had decided to pay attention. Cody started coming to my house more than I went to his. My mom liked him fine. She said he was polite. But once after he left, I heard her tell my dad there was something watchful about that boy. She used that exact word, watchful. My dad said she was reading into things. He knew things he shouldn't have. That was the next part I noticed. One afternoon I was going to cut through the tree line behind the Circle K on Route 7. I was heading to the drainage ditch where we caught crawdads. I hadn't told anyone, I was just going. Cody was already there when I arrived, sitting on a rock, not like he'd followed me, like he'd known. I asked him how he got there. He shrugged and said he figured I'd come that way. I let it go. You let things go when you're 11. Then there was the shoebox. He kept it under his bed. I saw it twice before I ever saw inside it. The second time I reached for it out of curiosity, and he got up from his chair faster than I'd ever seen him move. He put his foot on it, not angry, just immediate. He said it was private. I said okay. That was the end of it. What was in that box, I would not find out until the following spring. That winter, 2 cats on our street went missing, then a third one from the next block over. People put up flyers on the telephone poles, the kind with a photo and a phone number at the bottom. I remember seeing Mrs. Adler taping one to the post outside the Circle K, crying quietly while she did it. The flyer was photocopied crooked. The cat's name was in big block letters, Biscuit. She'd written her phone number by hand at the bottom because the machine had cut it off. Her handwriting was shaky. I asked Cody if he'd seen any of them. He thought about it longer than the question needed. Then he said he hadn't. The sleepover happened in March. My mom finally said yes because Darlene had called and invited me, which was unusual. Darlene almost never initiated anything. But she called, and my mom said that was a good sign, and she drove me over with my sleeping bag and a change of clothes. Ray was home that night. He sat in the living room watching a game with the sound turned too low. He nodded at me when I came in. He had a way of looking at people that I couldn't name then. It wasn't friendly and it wasn't mean. It was measuring, like he was deciding something about you. We ate dinner, played games, went to bed around 10. Cody's room was at the back of the house. The basement door was in the kitchen, 2 rooms away. I woke up at 2 in the morning. I don't know what woke me, maybe just the quiet going quieter. I lay there in the dark on my sleeping bag and I heard the slide bolt draw back. One clean metallic sound, heavier than you'd expect from inside a house. The kind of sound that carries. Then the door opened. I didn't move. The house had that deep stillness that East Texas gets in March. No wind, no crickets yet, just the hum of the refrigerator, and underneath it, nothing. The air in Cody's room smelled faintly of something I couldn't name then, something slightly wrong. The way a refrigerator smells when something in the back has been there too long. I noticed it right then, lying there in the dark, and I don't know why it had taken me until that moment. No voices, just steps, one set going down. Then maybe 20 minutes later, the same set coming back up, slow on the stairs, unhurried. The bolt slid closed again with that same deliberate sound. I kept my eyes shut the rest of the night. In the morning, Cody was cheerful at breakfast. Darlene made eggs and didn't look up from the stove. The kitchen smelled like butter and black pepper, and something underneath both of those things that I breathed through and didn't examine. I never asked him about it, but I kept coming back to the sound of that bolt, the specific weight of it in the dark, the unhurried pace of those footsteps on the stairs. Whoever walked down there wasn't afraid of what was at the bottom. That was the part that stayed with me. You walk carefully toward things that might surprise you. Those steps didn't. Then came the afternoon in the backyard, April. The air was thick, the light had gone yellow early, the way it does in East Texas when weather is coming in off the Gulf. You could smell turned-up clay near the fence line, that raw wet earth smell that clings to the back of your throat. A mockingbird was cycling through its calls somewhere in the loblolly pines past the fence. Then it stopped mid-phrase, the way birds sometimes do, like it had decided against it. Cody had a cardboard box he'd brought out from the shed. He was matter-of-fact about it, not showing off, not nervous, just doing something, the way you'd take out a toolbox if you needed a toolbox. Inside the box were the flyers, the cat flyers, maybe a dozen of them, folded neatly. Mrs. Adler's was on top. I could see Biscuit in those block letters. I could see her handwritten phone number at the bottom. He looked at me while I looked at them. That was the moment, not because of what the box meant. I was 11. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but because of his face while I looked at it. He was watching to see what I would do, perfectly still. No expression I could read, like this was a test and he already knew the answer and was just confirming it. The mockingbird didn't start back up. The air didn't move. The whole yard felt like it was waiting on the same thing he was waiting on. I stood there for what felt like a long time, long enough that I became aware of my own breathing. I didn't say anything. Some part of my brain understood that saying something was the wrong move. I just stood there. Then I said I had to get home for dinner, and I left. I told my older brother that night, not my parents, my brother who was 16. I told him about the box and the flyers and the basement bolt and the way Cody had looked at me. My brother didn't say a word while I talked. When I finished, he went downstairs and spoke to my dad for about 5 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said. The next morning, my mom told me I wouldn't be going over to Cody's house anymore. She didn't explain. My dad drove me to school instead of letting me take the bus. At school, I sat with different kids at lunch. Cody looked at me once across the cafeteria. That was the whole thing, one look, then he went back to eating. We moved that July 2 towns over, closer to Lufkin, new school in August. I thought about Cody sometimes, but I didn't talk about him. Kids don't really talk about those things, you just carry them. 20 years pass the way 20 years pass. I was 31 at my desk eating lunch. The article was short. Cody Marsh had been arrested in connection with an investigation into animal cruelty and what the paper called related property violations on a rural acreage outside Garrison. The property had belonged to his father, Ray, who had died in 2019. Neighbors had reported unusual activity over several months. The investigation was ongoing. It was the phrase related property violations that sent me back to that kitchen door, that bolt, the steps on the stairs at 2 in the morning. I don't know what was in that basement. I've made guesses I don't want to say out loud. The article didn't tell me. The follow-up piece I found 3 weeks later didn't go much further. The case was still pending last time I checked. I called my brother that night. He answered on the second ring. I said Cody's name and there was a pause on the line. He said, "I know, I saw it." I asked him what he'd told our dad that night back in 1995. He said he'd told him exactly what I'd told him, and that was enough. I've thought about that a lot, how my brother at 16 understood what I was describing, how my dad acted on it the next morning without asking me a single question. They knew, kids know, I just didn't know that I knew. I don't drive through Garrison anymore. That whole stretch of highway between Lufkin and the county line, I take a different route now. It adds maybe 20 minutes. Some roads you stop needing a reason to avoid, you just avoid them. The cot in the back room had been slept in. There was a cup of coffee next to it. Steam was still rising off it. I want you to sit with that for a second. Steam, rising off a cup of coffee, in a building that had been condemned since 2009. My name is Cal. I was 28 at the time. I did freelance urban exploration photography, not for any magazine or channel, just for myself. I've been inside grain elevators in rural Kansas, old textile mills in the western Carolinas, a decommissioned VA hospital outside Roanoke. I had a system. I had experience. I thought that counted for something. The Millhaven Arms was a 4-story residential hotel in the hill country of East Tennessee, not far off Route 70, maybe 8 miles east of a town called Carthage. Built in the 20s, run as a boarding house through the 50s, and then it got complicated. An owner dispute, a fire on the 3rd floor that killed 1 person, and then just nothing. The county condemned it in 2009. By the time I got there, the ground floor windows were boarded up, and the parking lot had cracked and heaved until it looked like a dry riverbed. I'd done my homework. A county assessment from 2018 described the building as structurally deteriorated but still standing. No utilities active since 2011. Occupancy prohibited. I got inside through a basement window on the north side. The board over it had rotted through at one corner. I pulled it back with my Stanley Fatmax pry bar and dropped in. That was around 4 in the afternoon, late October. East Tennessee in late October goes dark by 6:15, maybe 6:30. I had maybe 2 hours of natural light. After that, just my Fenix flashlight and whatever I could see through my camera. The first 2 floors were what I expected, plaster coming off in sheets, floorboards black with water damage, old wallpaper curling away from the walls in long strips, a dresser with no drawers, a cast iron bed frame tipped on its side, dust on everything, undisturbed, uniform dust, the kind that takes years to settle. The smell was mold and wet wood and something older underneath. The building felt hollow, like something had drained out of it a long time ago and never came back. I took my shots and moved to the 3rd floor. That's where things stopped matching. The stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors had a fire door, metal push bar across the middle, the standard kind. The fire that killed someone in that building had started on the 3rd floor. I expected that door to be sealed, chained maybe, or welded shut. It wasn't latched, it swung open when I touched it. I told myself that was nothing. I pushed through and kept going. The 3rd floor hallway ran the full length of the building, about 60 feet. Doors on both sides, most of them open. I swept my flashlight down the hall and saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed the floor. The dust pattern was wrong. In the rest of the building, dust sat flat and even. Up here there were scuff marks, not random, not animal tracks, clear, human-sized footprints running down the center of the hallway, back and forth, like someone pacing, like someone who lived there. I stopped and stood still. I listened. The building creaked the way old buildings do, nothing else. I followed the footprints. They led to a room at the far end of the hall, room 12, according to the tarnished number still screwed into the door. The door was open about halfway. I pushed it the rest of the way. The room was small, a window on the far wall, boarded on the outside but not sealed. Enough gray afternoon light leaked around the edges to see by. There was a cot against the right wall, military style, the folding kind, with a sleeping bag rolled out on top. A milk crate next to it acting as a table. And on that milk crate, a ceramic mug. Steam was coming off it. I didn't touch it, I didn't touch anything. I just stood there and looked at it. The feeling that went through me wasn't exactly fear. It was more like the world had just made a sound it wasn't supposed to make. Everything in me went quiet and paid attention. Someone had made that coffee maybe 5 minutes ago. That meant someone was here, in this building, right now. I looked around the room, a backpack against the wall, a folded set of clothes on the floor, a battery-powered lantern turned off, and on the wall above the cot, written in black marker, a column of tally marks. I counted them 63. The marker was fresh, the lines were sharp and dark against the peeling plaster. That wasn't left by some old resident. Someone had put those there recently. 63 days or 63 of something else. I didn't want to know which. I backed out of the room slowly, into the hallway. I kept my flashlight low, not pointing at doors, not broadcasting where I was. That's when I heard it. Footsteps 1 floor below me, slow and unhurried, crossing from one side of the building to the other. They stopped, then started again, moving toward the stairwell. I went cold. Maybe it was just another explorer, maybe someone as startled as I was. I knew that was possible, but the way those footsteps moved was not exploratory. There was no hesitation, no pausing to look at things, no moving around obstacles. Whoever was walking down there knew exactly where they were going. They were heading for the stairs. I looked both ways down the hallway. I'd come up through the south stairwell. There was another at the north end. I hadn't gone near it. I moved toward it now, fast but quiet, no running. I've learned the hard way that running in a condemned building is how you go through a floor. The south stairwell door opened behind me. I didn't look back. I hit the north stairwell door and pulled it open. The hinges screamed, old metal on old metal, loud enough to echo down every floor. There was no hiding anymore. I went down 2 steps at a time, one hand on the railing, the other holding my camera. 2nd floor landing, keep moving, 1st floor. I hit the main corridor and moved north, away from the window I'd come in through, looking for another way out. I found one, a back door that had been pried open at some point. The wood around the frame was splintered, old work, not mine. I went through it and came out into the overgrown lot behind the building, knee-high weeds, dead and brown from the October cold. I moved away without stopping, walked around to the front, and got into my Tacoma on the gravel pull-off, locked the doors. I sat there for about 10 minutes, watching the building. One of the boarded windows on the third floor, room 12, I'm almost certain had a sliver of light in it. Not daylight, something electric. The lantern was on now. I drove to the Circle K on Route 70 and called the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I told them everything. The cot, the coffee, the tally marks, the footsteps. The dispatcher was calm and said she'd send a unit out. 2 deputies responded. I waited in the Circle K parking lot for about an hour before one of them came back to talk to me. She told me they'd done a walk-through. They found the room, the cot, the sleeping bag, the milk crate, the tally marks on the wall. They found the backpack too. Inside it, a change of clothes, some canned food, a hand-crank radio, and a photograph of a woman and 2 children. No person, no coffee cup, both were gone. The deputy said it looked like someone had been living there for weeks, at minimum. They'd flag it as a potential welfare case and add the building to the patrol rotation. I drove home that night, 3 hours back to Knoxville. I kept the radio on the whole way. About 2 weeks later, I followed up with the department. A deputy told me they'd done 2 more walkthroughs and found the building empty both times. No sign of the person, no new evidence of activity. The county moved on demolition the following spring. The Millhaven Arms came down in April. I read about it in a 2-paragraph item in the local paper. No mention of an occupant, no mention of anyone ever being found. I still think about that photograph, the woman and the 2 kids. I don't know if it was family he was estranged from or people he'd lost or something else entirely. I don't know what 63 marks on a wall meant to him. I don't know what he was counting. I don't know why he made coffee and then vanished, or whether he was already watching me from somewhere in that building when I found it. I've gone back into other buildings since then. I'm not going to pretend this one cured me, but I move differently now. I listen more. I treat every floor like it might have someone on it who knows the layout better than I do. Empty buildings aren't always empty. I was lucky that whoever was in the Millhaven Arms that afternoon chose not to let me know they were there until I was already leaving. I've thought a lot about why. I still don't have an answer that makes me feel better.